Thanks. Design for a Darwinian Brain. So the title of this talk comes from a book by Ross Ashby. Hands up who knows Ross Ashby? Good. He was a cybernetician, and he lived in. He used to be a psychiatrist, and then he got into robots, and he made this thing called the homeostat, which was his model for a brain. And he wrote this brilliant book. It's well worth reading, Design for a Brain. So my talk is called Design for a Darwinian Brain. So he's one of my influences, the cyberneticians. Another one is my PhD was in the origin of life, and one of my influences is JBS Haldane. That should be JBS Haldane. He was a theoretical biologist and a geneticist, and he was the teacher of John Maynard Smith, who was an evolutionary biologist. Unfortunately, that's him giving a talk.
Once we've got natural selection,
he mentions natural selection. His student, I'm doing a little lineage. His student was Ershath Mari. Ershath Mari's there. This is a photograph I took during my girlfriend's PhD viva. Ersh was her supervisor, and so obviously he knew the subject already. So in Munich airport in 2008, we came up with this idea that Gerald Edelman was totally wrong. Gerald Edelman is a Nobel Prize winner who got his Nobel Prize for immunology. And when you win a Nobel Prize, it's brilliant because then afterwards you can study whatever you like and you get loads of money for it and you can't lose your job. So he started working on the brain, which he knew nothing about. And worse still, he came up with this theory called neural Darwinism, which is a nice name for something which is not Darwinian at all. So he made up this thing, took the name that I want to use, and made a theory that's totally wrong, and called it neural Darwinism to explain the brain. Now the problem with that is his theory is not Darwinian, and I'll try and make that clear to you what that means. And so Ersh and I, we made up a theory in Munich airport, waiting for a plane, that actually wouldn't it be nice if there was real Darwinism going on in the brain, that is, if there was real replication going on in the brain and natural selection going on in the brain. So here's a theory, or a hypothesis at the moment, because the theory is a bit better, isn't it? And the neuronal replicator hypothesis. The hypothesis is that there are replicators in your brain, and that the replicators in your brain evolve by natural selection as you think and sleep, right? So in each one of your brain, and that this natural selection going on in your brain allows open-ended thought and the generation and selection of ideas and actions and values, or the representations of those things in your brain. That's the idea. And there's several reasons we think this. Constraints from the neural implementation details and the algorithmic details, which I hope to talk a little bit about. But why we think it is a different issue, why we came up with this crazy idea. The question is, it's a hypothesis, it's a scientific hypothesis, so they have to be testable, right? You have to be able to show that they're not true. So there's three ways we can do that, and we've got a grant now to try and do that. The first is obviously to make some models about what could replicate in the brain, because nothing obviously replicates in the brain, right? And then to show, using real brains, whether we can actually find those things. It's like being Watson and Crick and trying to find DNA, right? It's trying to find the basis of information in a system. So if we can show that, then that's good. The other way we can do something to show that this crazy idea might be right is to try and fit human behavior to this idea, to fit human problem solving or search to a model of underlying a Darwinian search model, some sort of cognitive architecture. And the other way we can do it, and this is an indirect variant, this is even more indirect, it's a proof of principle, a thought experiment to show that it could work, is to make robots that can that work by this principle, that can do more interesting things than any other robot that's been made before, right? So the critical question, well, I think the thing that really needs to be clarified, because there's a hell of a lot of confusion about this, is what is natural selection, right? So The definition that John Maynard Smith gives there in his lecture at the Royal Society is this. Natural selection is an algorithm that happens when you have units of evolution. So units of evolution are entities that multiply. That is, one produces two, or more. So there's multiplication. But that's not sufficient for natural selection because lots of things multiply, that is, have exponential growth. So, for example, fire multiplies, right? But it doesn't undergo natural selection. The free radical reaction in fire produces more oxygen free radicals at an exponential rate. So that's not sufficient. What you have to have as well is heredity. That is, the offspring must resemble their parents, right? More than they resemble other things. And that, okay, so fire has heredity actually as well, because the free radical that is produced resembles the original free radical. In fact, it's the same. So you have to have variation as well. There's a third requirement, variation. There have to be differences within a generation. Variation means differences within a generation. Variability is differences over generations. So there's variation, there's a circle, a square, and a triangle, right? So units of evolution multiply, have variation and heredity. And if you have differential fitness, that is, if the probability of replicating is correlated with the structure of the object, like if triangles can replicate faster than circles, then you can get selection. Triangles will increase in the population, right? So natural selection is an algorithm which happens when you have units of evolution. Units of evolution are things with multiplication, variation, and heredity. And if you have selection, then you can get fitness increasing. So it's a very computer science kind of thing, natural selection. And it has to be distinguished from a load of other algorithms which are like natural selection but which aren't. So a stochastic hill climber, that's an algorithm where you have an individual, you make a variant. If the variant is better than the individual, you keep it. And if it's not, you keep it with some small probability, right? So the variant, you can actually make a change to yourself. Remember that change, or remember what you were before, and go back to that state that you were in before if the change you made was no good. So the way you can imagine that is there's a robot on a hillside, and the robot takes a step, and if the step is higher, it stays there, and if it's lower, it goes back to the original place and makes another random step, right? So there's one robot exploring a sort of Himalayan landscape. Now, if you've got thousands of robots, what's a cleverer thing to do? If you want to try and get to the top of the hill, right? If you've got thousands of robots, one fairly stupid thing to do would be to just allow all the robots to explore independently, to be random, to be independent hill climbers, stochastic hill climbers, right? And that will give you a linear speed up, typically. Another thing you might want to do, so this is what I put in this is kind of parallel search. Another thing you might want to do is to allow competitive learning, which is that you may want to imagine all the robots only have a limited amount of battery, and you can only do a certain number of steps. You may want the robot that is higher up to do more of the exploration. So to bias the amount of resources for search that you give to the ones that are currently better. In some situations that would be good, in some situations that would be bad, but that's basically competitive learning. And actually, Gerald Edelman's theory, we've shown, falls into this category of thing, because what he proposes is there's many neuronal groups, and the neuronal groups with more reward, they grow more. That is, they become stronger, but they don't actually make a copy of themselves to another neuronal group. So it's very much, it is formally a type of competitive learning. Now, natural selection is a special thing, which you can understand in terms of these robots. Natural selection is where, if you've got 1,000 of these robots and you want to get to the top of one of the highest hill in the Himalayas, what you do with natural selection is, the robots that are higher up, they recruit other robots that are elsewhere to come and join them in a position nearby. So what that means is, they are transmitting the information about their position to other material resources in the population. And that's copying, right? So there's actually information transmission between one robot and another, because when you get the robot over here, what that's doing is to imagine each robot is a kind of register. You're rewriting that register with the information about the position. And so what's critical about natural selection is populations and information transfer between individuals in a population. And that's what happens in artificial immune systems. It's actually what happens in ant colony optimization. And it's what we propose happens in the brain. And actually, there is some evidence at the receptive field level, like in V1, the visual cortex, that there is copying of information in the brain. So what you can do is you can take a cat, and you can cut out a bit of its retina, and the retina has a topographic projection to V1. So if you cut, this is V1, so this bit of V1 won't get any information, and the neurons around it have orientation selective response characteristics. And what happens if you do this is that the neurons in here take on the response characteristics of one of the a small subset of the adjacent neurons through lateral connections forming, right? So there's actually definitely copying that goes on in the brain. Now there's a difference between copying and replication, because there's lots of copying that goes on in my computer, right? I'm always copying things from one bit to another. But it's not replication, because replication is copying where you also copy the probability of being copied. So replication is where you basically inherit fitness, because there's a correlation between the probability of being copied and traits. And so there's lots of work in the brain which has already showed that there's definitely copying in cortex, but it's slightly more difficult to show that there's replication, because to show that, you'd have to show that this neuron, when it got the firing characteristic of this neuron, would have a probability of copying that to another neuron that was correlated with the probability of this neuron copying itself in the first place. So anyway, but the point I want to get from this slide is that natural search is basically parallel competitive learning with information transmission between individuals. And so the real question is there anything in the brain that can transmit information, can replicate information from one part to another? What are the kinds of structures that can do that? And so the first part of our research is to make models of this. So I'll skip to the model slide. Is to make models of this, and we've got various models, computational neuroscience models of how that's possible. So one of the models is that if you have a pattern of one of the units of evolution that we propose in the brain is that small patterns of connectivity can copy themselves from one part of the brain to another. So if you have, say, a pattern of connectivity here, this looks like a Bayesian net. So B goes to C, B goes to A. So there are several possible topologies, 12 or 16, depending on whether you allow self-connections in a 3-node network. So that's a pattern of connectivity. And one proposal is that we've got a model for how this pattern of connectivity can copy itself to another pattern of part of the brain. And the way we do that is using a topographic map and spike time-dependent plasticity. And to cut a long story short, because I'm not going to talk about the neuroscience here, this bit of brain actually does causal inference on this bit of brain by observing the spike statistics from this bit of brain. So when this neuron fires, then these two neurons are going to fire in a fairly consistently a short delay afterwards. But when this neuron fires, there's going to be typically no correlation with this neuron. So spontaneous activity does interventions on this system to produce a set of statistics which this bit of brain can observe. And with spike time dependent plasticity and a few other little things which manage to disambiguate Markov equivalent structures here, with plausible neural mechanisms, you can actually copy small neural circuits from one bit of brain to another. And that's interesting because in The Origin of Life, there is this issue about Eigen's error catastrophe, which is the problem of how much information you can copy as a function of copying fidelity. So there's this threshold. If you have a gene sequence of 100 units in length, you cannot actually evolve that thing unless you've got a less than 1 in 100 error rate, right? So there's a rather nice idea that this results in, which is that the brain has had to reduce its error rate in terms of copying before it can transmit large amounts of information and select that information in this form. So that's one way you could get copying. And another way that we've proposed is that if you have a network, that there can be many possible pathways of activation through that network. So just with this network here, there's many different routes that a path of activity could take. And so if each path of activity is equivalent to a genotype, then you can actually have many different genotypes that overlap each other within a network. So this is we've just worked out another method by which you can have something that runs something equivalent to evolutionary computation but embedded within a network. And that's something that might be more suitable for the brain. So we've also got another paper which shows how you can get selection on patterns of neural activity. So, but the main point of this talk isn't to talk about the models. I just want to say that there are fairly plausible models about how copying could be done, and what we're going to do now is to test it on fetal rat neurons. So in Sussex, Kevin Starus has these. You take a pregnant rat, you kill it, you take its fetuses out, you cut the fetuses' brains up, and you solubilize their neurons, and you put them in the fridge. And then you can put them into slides, and what we can do with these microelectrode arrays is to stimulate them, say with the output of a network, say a 3-node network with delays, spontaneous activity. We stimulate them with that, see what patterns of connectivity form, and then see what spontaneous activity that dish has. We record that activity, and then we play that back to another dish, and we see if that dish can copy that pattern of activity. So actually, the model that exactly the model I described before. We're going to see if that can actually happen in a dish of fetal rat neurons. So it's not a perfect test. It doesn't actually show. We've sort of artificially put the topographic mapping in there because we're having these dishes, but it's a start, and it's something that has to be done to really confirm whether this theory is true or not. So that's one approach. The second approach is to, as I said, to look at human behavior and problem solving. So looking at the kind of search that infants do in order to, say, learn how to walk. High-dimensional generative searches that are so for example, learning language, or human insight problem solving, when you have a problem like this, the 9-dot problem, and you have to join all the dots up with 4 lines, right? So you're generating various ideas, and you're creating your own goal functions to describe which of those ideas are good. Here's one. It doesn't work. The first one, there's a dot missing. And you generate various ideas, and you select those ideas. So trying to fit that kind of data. So we've got some psychologists in Munich who are going to fit our models. So, but what models are these? So the task that I'm working on with Alex here and Vera is to see if we can make a cognitive architecture which is Darwinian, and see if we can produce interesting generative behavior in robotics. So this is an extension of a field called evolutionary robotics, where people typically evolve neural networks, continuous time recurrent neural networks, to control small robots to do various things like phototaxis or simple learning tasks. But the robot we are using is the Neo, a humanoid robot from Aldebaran Robotics in Paris, that comes with a very good software interface, a Python software interface, and so our code is written in Python. And I'm going to talk about some work we've been doing in the last month or so for a paper deadline on the 21st of June. So we're still generating these results. It's quite new work, and it's our Darwinian cognitive architecture. So this architecture we're building, and we want this architecture. So the aim of this architecture is that it's a it's a kind of black box. You buy this black box with a USB cable in it, and you attach it to anything you like, and it learns how to do interesting things with that thing you attach it to. So it's something. It's like you're a baby's brain, and you find yourself in the body of a baby, and you think, what the hell should I do? And it tries to use this body in a way that the body can be used. So it tries to discover the affordances of that system. I mean, this is not entirely unlike the brain, because you can take a chimpanzee and you can cut its skull off, and you can attach 100 electrodes into its motor cortex, and you can get it to control a joystick to move a cursor on a screen. But at the same time, it's controlling a robot arm in the next room, which is also controlling a joystick. And after a while, it doesn't actually have to control the joystick anymore. It can just directly control the robot arm in the other room to control the joystick. So the brain has a lot of reconfigurability, right? And the chimpanzees were never evolved to control robot arms. So the brain certainly has quite a bit of capacity to control novel, to discover novel sensory motor contingencies and affordances and manipulate them. So that's what if our architecture is successful, we will be able to produce this bit of software that anybody can build a robot. You plug the software into the robot, and you leave it there for, I don't know, 300 years, and it then discovers something useful to do with that robot. So the aim is to try and reduce that amount of time to the amount of time before the robot breaks. So, okay, so the architecture is basically this. Okay, so in cognitive science there is a schism, and there's been a schism for a while, and that's the schism between the physical symbol system people, the GoFi people, and the connectionist people, right? There's also the dynamical systems people, but I'm going to clump them in with the connectionist people. So the physical symbol systems people are Jerry Fodor, and Zenon Pollution. They wrote a very good paper in 1988, which basically, where they claim to destroy connectionism. And the connectionist people are people like Jeff Hinton and Rumelhurt and McClelland, the people that work with neural networks. Now, these people have a fundamental disagreement about what are the minimal requirements for general intelligence. The GoFi people say that you need to have a physical symbol system. And a physical symbol system is a very simple thing, really. It's what chemistry is. It's what molecules are. So molecules are, a physical symbol system has the properties of systematicity, compositionality, and productivity. So productivity means you can generate an unlimited number of adaptive structures. So I can generate an unlimited number of sentences, right? Like in chemistry, you can generate an unlimited number of molecules. So when you learn language, you don't learn a list of sentences off by heart and then use one of those sentences. You learn the rules for constructing sentences and you generate the sentences, right? So similarly, a chemist doesn't learn a list of, well, a good chemist doesn't learn a list of chemical reactions. He learns how the atoms link to each other in systematic ways and what the properties of those linkages are, right? So that bit is systematicity and compositionality. That is the idea that there are units, atoms, which have legitimate and illegitimate ways of linking with each other to produce structures, and that these structures function is a systematic function of the function of those units. So Fodor and Pollution argue that connectionist systems don't have those properties. They don't have the properties of recombinability that preserves meaning. So these are pretty subtle claims, but I think the easiest way to think about it is in terms of the chemistry metaphor. So what we've developed here is a architecture which actually synthesizes these warring factions, that an architecture which is both a physical symbol system and has the the useful properties that connectionist systems have. And so here it is. So the architecture consists of what I metaphorically call atoms. These are not real atoms, this is a metaphor. And these atoms are capable of replication. Now, they really are capable of replication. I see these atoms as being some sort of neural microcircuit in a bit of cortex, right? And so it's sort of neuronal group in the cortex, which has certain functional properties. It could be some kind of functional property that you would find in the chapter of a machine learning textbook. Some kind of, it would do some kind of classification. It would do some kind of processing. The atom has some sort of encapsulated function. It can do some processing. And it's those atoms which are capable of replication with variation. And these atoms form molecules. Now, these molecules, what would they be like in the brain? The way I see it is these atoms, these bits of cortex, can link to each other through the basal ganglia. That is, the basal ganglia is a structure that's quite ancient in the middle of the brain that has a very large fan in and fan out to the cortex. And the basal ganglia can act as a sort of router and a set of registers by which patterns of atoms can switch on and off other patterns of atoms in the cortex. And the molecule that I envisage here is a distributed molecule between that links parts of cortex through the basal ganglia. And these molecules aggregate to form what I call compartments. They're not really compartments, that's another metaphor. But these compartments are fundamentally the unit of evolution, in the sense that they are the unit which replicates as a whole, and to which fitness is assigned. That is, in any given period of time when you're behaving, when you're doing something like this, then that is a compartment that's responsible for that behavior, right? So these compartments may be overlapping, they may be probabilistic. They are the entity at that particular time which is assigned reward and which can be assessed. That's the critical thing. So, okay, so here's an atom. So the atoms in our architecture, they take in some sensory input, they take messages from other atoms, they have conditions, which means they are only on or off. They're active or inactive depending on what input they're getting. They have some sort of processing that they do, and then they send messages to other atoms, and they may issue motor commands. So inside an atom, you can basically have any of your favorite machine learning algorithms. You can have temporal difference learning, you can have CMAS, whatever you like, a deep belief network. Stick anything you like in that atom, right? So we initialize the system with a set of molecules, which are a collection of atoms that relate to each other. So, for example, in this system, this is a simple system that implements closed-loop control, right? So you have a sensory atom sending information to just a linear transform, sending information to a motor atom. And you can randomly initialize this with a subset of sensors from the NAO, like, the left ankle or whatever, and some other subset of sensors, a certain number. Random matrix to start with, and some random motors. So this basically does reflexes, right? So this is a set of, this is a molecule that does reflexes, called an STM molecule, because it's a sensory transform motor. So here's another molecule you can just make up. It's an oscillator molecule. It's a null sensor to start with. The reason it's a sensor there is because in our algorithm, we always, when we do a trial, we always initialize the sensor atoms first. So this sensor atom will become active, but it doesn't send any information. It just activates these oscillator atoms, which contain a vector of oscillators with a specified phase and amplitude and frequency. And those send outputs to transforms. So this basically does a linear superposition of these oscillators, which then activates a motor. So there are also delays, I forgot to mention, between in transmission, delays, and after a downstream atom becomes activated, it switches itself off after a certain amount of time. So the point of this is that when you activate that, this is actually quite a sort of temporally rich structure. You can specify quite a complex set of motions or whatever with this specification. So, okay, so, and what you can do with what we've done is to initialize an evolutionary algorithm to control this robot, the Neo, with these initial set of randomly initialized molecules according to these constraints, this initial set of constraints, and we evolve these compartments to do various behaviors. So the whole system has to be specified by specifying first the types of atom you can have. So we have sensory atoms, motor atoms, transform atoms, learning atoms, and some other specialized kinds of atoms. But we also have to specify how, when you make an atom, you have to specify how it can change, how it can be varied, right? So we have a set of atomic variation operators. So for each type of atom, you can have a certain kind of change. So for a motor atom, there's a certain probability you might change which motor it operates. Or a linear transform, you might change the elements in that matrix. So you have to, there's a lot of these decisions to be made about what atomic operators to use, right? But as well as the variation of the atomic operators, there's also going to be variation in the way the atoms connect together. So these are fundamentally going to be graph rewrite rules, which operate on these molecules to change the structure of these molecules. So if these were, for example, probabilistic graphical models, the graph rewrite rules would be rules which changed, which told you how to change a probabilistic graphical model on the basis of some evidence. Right? So these can either be stochastically applied, just with, homogeneously, or a rewrite rule may be much more specifically applied as a function of experience. So really what I'm talking about here is control structures which are capable of variation. And so this is a method for generating behavioral diversity and controlling this humanoid robot in different ways. So what's the problem? The problem is that there's a shitload of possible atoms and variation operators that you could choose, right? And most of them are going to be rubbish. So the research program is to work out what is the right set of atoms and the right set of variation operators that tends to produce good changes in behavior. When we do complex behavior, we don't just make random variations to the behavior, we make very structured variations. And a lot of that structure is going to be what specifies how those variations are made. Is coming from various sources. One of them is simply the constraints of the physical body. And the other is the set of variation constraints to these structures that are innate in terms of how neural changes occur, right? So, and another subset is going to be learnt during one's lifetime, what kinds of variations to make. And so there's going to be a mix of these. And so effectively what this set of variation operators is a kind of action grammar. It's just like in language, there's a set of legitimate modifications you can make to a representation that is likely to be something that produces a legitimate meaning. In motor action, there's likely to be a set of variations that you can do to a controller that's more likely than not to produce a functional offspring controller. So what we're doing then is to abstract this kind of search that infants do as a kind of evolutionary computation. It's a very simple thing. So what's been recognized is that babies reset themselves. So when they try to reach for something and they don't quite manage it, they reset themselves and try again. So it's quite interesting. And another thing that can be observed is that what they're trying to do is sometimes quite difficult to understand. So it's difficult to understand what sort of goal function they have. So obviously children aren't running a microbial genetic algorithm in their head, and there's much more complex methods of action selection. But what we're going to do for now is to just abstract this process of search and pretend that they're running a microbial genetic algorithm. And what that means is there's a population of these solutions, a population of compartments, each compartment containing molecules that control the robot. And we're going to pick 2 of these compartments at random, get each one to control the robot for a little amount of time, measure how, according to some fitness criteria, how well that did, and we're going to take the winning compartment and we're going to overwrite the losing compartment. Actually, we're going to overwrite it completely in this case. And then we're going to mutate the losing compartment, that is a copy of the winner. So we're going to run a simple genetic algorithm. And we're going to try and optimize these molecules to do some behavior. So we've had a first go at doing this. I call the system the Evolutionary Robotic Operating System. And it's programmed in a Python framework to which we ultimately want to be able to control a range of robots. It can already control the epoch and various robots in WebOps. We wanted to control Arduino robots as well. And as I said, the aim is to be able to plug it into many things and produce interesting behavior. So we start with the Neo. So at the moment, we're using fixed goals. Now, and I'll talk about why that's not quite the right thing to do in a minute. So let's say our first fixed goal that we've tried is to get the robot to stand on its head. Here's the Neo. So we initialize a population of compartments for the Neo that are like, sorry, you can't see that very well. This is a compartment. It contains 3 molecules. We randomly initialize this set of molecules, compartments with this set of molecules. So a random set of sensors going into an oscillator, going through an Ezekowicz atom. This Ezekowicz atom is actually a whole Ezekowicz spiking neural network. And that controls a set of motors. We have another thing, sensor, Ezekowicz motor, sensor, linear transform motor. So this is like an oscillator. This is a null sensor, sorry. So this is like the robot just does motions, and these are reflexes built on top of those central pattern generated motions, right? So we just made that up and decided to start from that. And we have, as I said, we have a set of operators that we decided on. So we're going to allow the atoms to mutate in various ways, and we're going to add and remove these molecules. We've decided to have this variation operator where we add and remove whole chunks, motifs of these molecules, because that tends to produce a less brittle search landscape. And we also allow the construction and the removal of edges between atoms. That's important because we want new kinds of molecules to be able to form. And since the molecules are removed and added together, this can actually learn linkage. And in evolution, linkage learning is very important to structure the effective recombination. So, but this is just a first pass. I mean, this is there are going to be many better variation operators than this. And actually, one of the reasons that evolution is such a clever thing is because it gets better over time. There's this thing called the evolution of evolvability, which is how evolution can actually increase the probability that offspring will be better over time. It does this if you can have variation in heritable variation in the exploration distribution, the way that you generate offspring. But this is a whole new story, and I can't go into it now. But there are ways in which this system can automatically improve its variation operators. Anyway, so here's an overnight run on Alex's MacBook Pro, which shows an improvement in fitness when the oh no, this is on my server. It shows an improvement in fitness when the robot was evolved, I think, to stand on its head. Yes. So here the robot actually. So normally the robot resets to a position where it's lying down, supine, and what happened here was that the robot fell over onto its face, and so all the controllers that were actually evolved to try and get it to stand on its head didn't work anymore then, because they were doing totally the wrong thing, because it didn't work when the robot was lying flat on its face. And after a while, the robot learned, I think, actually just went back onto its back. So the behavior at the beginning is pretty bad after like just 100 different experiments that the robot's doing. Oh, yeah. And the robot gets a little bit better at standing on its head after, I think, 4,600. Is that 4,600? Yeah, 4,600 evaluations. And this is the set of molecules that's evolved. We haven't analysed that at all. We've also tried, so that's with that certain particular set of variation operators. We've also tried actually putting in an atom which does stochastic hill climbing. So this little atom, during one trial, actually changes parameters on the fly. So what's interesting here is that you can combine. So this Darwinian system, it's actually a very top-level architecture, which is selecting between different kinds of control circuit. Within that control circuit, you can have any architecture you like. So we put this stochastic hill climbing atom in. So that's the fitness graph of the things we're evolving there. And so here we can look at some behavior through the generations as it's trying to evolve to stand on its head with this slightly different kind of variation that we're allowing. So I think that's the 10th, that's the 1,000th evaluation. So each evaluation takes about 10 seconds. So we run it, run another one, compare the two, and overwrite the loser with the winner. So I can't remember which one we're on now. So it's getting a little bit better at standing on its head. It could do better. I mean, all these runs are overnight. So that's, I mean, if a baby did that overnight, that would be quite impressive. And we're only using a computer. So this is the compartments that evolve over time. Again, the only thing I want you to take from that is that they appear to get bigger. We haven't analysed that at all. We just generated the result last night. So here's another thing. Here's max Z. We want to maximize. Sorry, we want to maximize the Z accelerometer here. So standing on its head would do that. And I've just had I had a daughter 8 months ago. I've noticed that if she's lying on her front, and I think this is a general principle, if they're lying on their front, they can do more stuff and they can learn better how to crawl. So we thought, well, let's make the robot lie on its front and see what happens then with it trying to max Z, right? Instead of lying on its back. And so we started it up from the reset position at the front. And so that's the increase in fitness we got. And that's actually the best solution it discovered after a few generations of evolution lying on its front. And I think I've got a video. So I think this is the 0th, 5th, and 11th. So, yeah, generation. So each of these is actually the result of thousands of generations of evolution, and over time the behavior improves by evolving these control circuits. And so actually what we noticed here is that adding the stochastic hill climber molecule did actually produce a higher fitness in the end, and also lying on the front helped it to achieve a better solution. Okay, so we've also, we had some not very successful attempts at the moment of trying to get it to move. So we try to evolve it to maximize its distance. We can definitely do better than this with the variation operators we've got now. This was some weeks ago where we hadn't refined the atom types. So this was the very early attempt to actually move. It's trying to sort of drag itself along by its feet. Then we tried it on the real Neo. We were quite worried we might break the Neo at this stage. So then we put it onto a polystyrene surface that Ho kindly found. Oh yes. So this is actually the final solution. It's quite graceful, as you can see. It doesn't quite move in a straight line, but we didn't specify that it had to. But I'm sure we can do better than that now. So these were the molecules that were responsible for that motion. The motion is very simple. It's just a null sensor. There was an atom that set the motors to a specific value, a specific joint angle. That activated with a delay of another atom which operated on the same motors to set them to another joint angle, and then this atom activated that one. So in this case, we didn't have these oscillator molecules already in there. It just discovered this circuit that does oscillation. So later on, we've tried different atom types with, say, Zikowicz neurons to do distance again. And there's, I think, a similar solution. It's not that's a similar principle. There was another atom type. I want to quickly rush through these. Because there is a they're all trying to basically use their legs to push off. This one's slightly wriggly. So, okay, so these are just some slightly embarrassing first results of how the architecture can be practically used with a fixed fitness function. I like that. I think it's quite wiggly. So, we've got molecules in compartments, right? So the argument I was making was that this would allow compositionality and systematicity and so forth. So the real question is, once we've evolved these compartments on one task, can they be reused for another task? That is the whole point of lifetime learning, right? Can the component molecules that have certain reflexes or functions be used? So the way to test that is to evolve it on one fitness function, then keep an archive of molecules that we've evolved on that fitness function, and try that out on new fitness functions, and allowing recombination from the solution to the archive and back, and see if that improves the rate. And I was going to show 2 slides of runs we did last night to test that, but unfortunately they didn't work. So I skipped straight to this slide. So at the moment, the system has not invented the games that it plays. We've imposed the games that it's going to play, right? We've said, maximize your Z accelerometer or maximize distance, right? But we don't impose games like that on children much. So how can an algorithm decide which games to play, right? How should it decide what a good game to play is? As academics, we also invent our research problems and try to solve them, right? So a clever child, like a clever academic, must choose the right games to play. How do you choose what games to play? So one principle is, let's say, a game mustn't be too hard, right? If a game is too hard, what it means is that all the solutions have low fitness on that game, right? And a game mustn't be too easy either. If a game is too easy, then it means that all your solutions are good. So a game must be just right. So a game must allow progress to be made on it, or at least there must be predicted progress that can be made on it. And it turns out there's a theory from evolutionary biology called Fischers' fundamental theorem of natural selection. It says that the rate of fitness increase in a population is proportional to the fitness variance. The more difference there is in the fitness of the population, the faster its fitness will go up. That's clever because it means just by observing something now, you can predict the future, right? You observe the variance and you can predict how the fitness will change. So that's what we could do. So if we have a game, we can observe the variance of the solutions on that game and choose games, actually evolve the games as well, where the fitness of a game is the variance of the quality of solutions on that game. Now, Fischers' theorem only works if there's some special conditions in the genetic system, and those don't really actually hold in any realistic system, because most of evolution is neutral. Just as we've seen there are, like here. That's pretty neutral, look. So there's no fitness increase, it's a plateau, there's punctuated equilibrium. And then you suddenly find this improvement, right? So if you're applying Fischer here, it wouldn't tell you very much. So it's very difficult to predict the future. It's difficult to predict evolutionary progress. But what you can do is sample. So what you can do is to actually, and this is what we do, we sample the progress that's being made on a particular game, and we have a population of games, and then we actually replicate the game that's where most progress is being made, right? So it's actually, I think the brain is like an evolutionary system which is self-supervising. It observes itself and tries to maximize the rate of evolution it can do. So I've just made these up, general minimal criteria for good games. And I think there's undoubtedly two criteria which must hold. Absolute criteria. A game is not worth playing, and well, maybe you can tell me otherwise. A game is not worth playing unless progress is being made on it, or if progress is not predicted. And actually Udair is working on that idea. A game's not worth playing because it could kill you or cause you irreparable damage. Ashby, I call them the viability criteria. So I think these two criteria must hold for a good game. And we've tried this one already. The problem with that, if you just have it on its own, there's a very large space of trivial games which satisfies that property. You can choose, I can choose to do that, and then I can choose to do that with a green pen, or a laser pointer. So there's a very large space of trivial games which satisfy that. Don't quite satisfy that, actually, but there is. Relative criteria. So I think extra criteria have to be added. A good game, so various people have had these ideas. A good game allows learning of information useful for real challenges later on in life, like getting jobs or cheese. And that's what Tolman said. That's what latent learning. You put a rat in a maze without any cheese and it learns the maze, and later on it can get the cheese faster once you put the cheese in, even though there was no cheese in the beginning. A good game builds knowledge about the world, allows facts to be learned. Okay, I call that the epistemic criteria. It's good to learn facts. Another one is a good game builds deep understanding of the world. That is, allows learn some generative model or theory to be learned. And this is what Schmidhuber talks about in terms of the compression criteria. He thinks beauty is compressibility, and interestingness is the first derivative of compressibility. Another thing, a good game allows one to predict more about the future, i.e. maximizes the first derivative of predictive information. So people here have worked on predictive information, and other people... So predictive information is how much uncertainty you can reduce about the future by observing the state now, given that you know the past. And so it might be the case that we try to, in babies, try to maximize that when they behave, and that might be a minimal criteria they're using very generally to select what to do. Another one I like, a good game allows many novel solutions to be produced quickly. Alex introduced me to the work of Lehman and Stanley, who've done a radical thing in evolutionary computation. They've removed the fitness function, and they only reward an individual if they produce behaviors that are distant, according to a phenotypic Euclidean, shitty phenotypic Euclidean distance measure from other solutions. So they reward solutions which are different according to some measure. And I think with the more sophisticated distance measure, that's potentially really quite exciting, because that might be how evolution works to produce. There's a problem in evolutionary biology and in artificial life. Nobody knows how to produce open-ended evolution. That is, produce a system where you just want to not switch the computer off, because it's continually producing new things. Everybody is quite happy with switching their evolutionary system off. But if this problem is solved, the system will be able to accumulate adaptation and produce continual novelty. And so there's two issues here that are related. The first is the accumulation of adaptation, which is about lifetime learning that I was talking about. And the second issue is about what kinds of selection function allow you to produce, to benefit systems which can accumulate adaptation. So there's a lot of information there. We have, I think, a short amount of time for questions, but thank you very much for people at the Centre for Intelligent Sensing for asking me to talk, and I hope we have some time for questions now.
Any questions?
Thank you for your talk. When I think about a child that is learning the environment around him, I think about the failures he makes, and he learns from failures, and I think that is modeled with your fitting function, if I'm not wrong, or your machine learning tools. And I think he also tried to, using his sensors, to see what other people are doing, for instance. And so he kind of mimic what the adults are doing. And do you have that specific behavior in your model?
No, but you're absolutely right. The imitation, for which mirror neurons have been thought to be very important. So you see somebody going, and then yeah, this is amazing. Frida can do this. I waved to her like that, and then she went. That's incredibly complicated bit of processing, isn't it? To actually be able to do that, and I think that must be. There are fairly complicated systems that must be. I'm not sure how those systems develop, but certainly we need that kind of atom in there. That would be the sort of functionality you would put into an atom, and then the system would work out how that atom can be used with other systems and reused in various molecules to do various functions. That's how our system would use that. So, yeah.
Because you were speaking about the goal of you are giving the goal to stand on the head. Maybe the goal comes from.
Oh yeah. That's true. Yeah. So a lot of our goals are actually scaffolded by the environment. Yeah, especially social learning. So Vygotsky and other people have talked about this process. I mean, there's a huge amount of. I'm not an expert on that interaction, but it's really critical. And I think, for example, in autism, these kinds of things, there are methods which we have of learning other people's expectations, which are very sophisticated. So if I ask you to dinner, and even before I finish asking you to dinner, you say yes, then I know that you were expecting me to ask you for dinner, because you said yes before reaction time. So I can get a lot of information about people's social expectations by these simple heuristics. And I think these kinds of things are going to be critical for scaffolding learning into the direction we want it to go, yeah.
It's another sort of null hypothesis, or something you'd like to find as sort of speciation of these different molecular configurations that you'll get. And so you get sort of like, you have specialized neurons, you'll come up with specialized parts.
Right, okay. So I think that yes. So in the cortex, I think the cortex is very much like the surface of the planet. There are lots of ecosystems there, like a little rainforest, being one bit of cortex that does, say, knowledge of London roads for taxi drivers. There's another bit of cortex, and that actually grows in taxi drivers, right? And there's another bit of cortex that does, I don't know, Jennifer Aniston fantasies, and that bit of cortex grows also in some conditions. And so I think that's an ecosystem, and a Jennifer Aniston neuron, whoever Jennifer Aniston is, a Jennifer Aniston neuron is not going to survive well in the London taxi driver. Well, maybe he is. I'm not sure how it works. Yeah. But you know what I mean.